Welcome into the Illini Inquirer podcast. We got Derek Piper back on the podcast. And I got to be honest with you, Derek, this is much overdue, but I've been on the road. There's a lot of football things to cover. It's amazing what happens, how busy you get when you get a 4-0 football team to cover. So we are sorry for the delay. We didn't have a Keaton Wagler reaction pod by itself. We didn't have a Tim Anderson pod reaction by itself because Illinois, kudos for the Friday night news dump right before a huge football game. Well executed. We were pretty busy. We couldn't handle all that. But now another commitment. Brandon Leak is here. So we bring on Derek. But football is taking precedence for one here, Derek, and heading into October.
I love it. Yeah, we saw that in 2022. Basketball is kind of quietly sneaking up on us. I can't believe Big Ten Media Day is next week. So that's pretty crazy. And the trip to Ole Miss will be here before you know it. So, and yeah, this is usually the time. I know standard and things have changed with the portal and whatnot, but the fall was always big, official visit and commits and all that, and getting hyped up around some football weekends that you bring in recruits. And Brad Underwood and company have made just ho-hum 2 4-star guards. Here you go.
Yeah, we got to talk about this. I'm just thinking back to the biggest September, October official visits of our time. The Jalen Brunson, Juwan Evans felt like a big moment for the John Gross era, and it didn't end up being in a good way. Was Cliff a fall? Cliff Alexander, was he a fall visit? Him and Quentin Snyder, those couple weekends felt like a big moment for John Gross, and not in a great way. That was like the biggest part. That was like the biggest part, of basketball coverage for us for a little bit. Were these official visits of can they land the guys to turn this program around?
Right. Yeah. And you go back to that Juwan and Jalen cycle. I think you definitely had Elijah Thomas in that one, Carlton Bragg, if I'm not mistaken, also in that class. So we talked about all the potential. Some of those names, will be some real throwbacks there. But yeah, Io and Taylor.
Carlton Bragg, that's a name I have not heard in a very long time, Derek.
Right. Yeah. Didn't do a whole lot in college after going to Kansas. So, we had some high points where you had to invest a lot of your hope in landing one of those big fish, or obviously trying to stack that thing and get it going because the program needed talent in a big way. Now there are multiple avenues to get that done. Now we've even introduced the international scene, of course, with Kasparis, Tomislav Visic as well. So that is in mind with roster building for Brad Underwood and company, where it is you got to think about how much flexibility you want in the portal, which hint, usually quite a bit. And then also maybe internationally in the spring as well. So high school has taken a backseat for the most part, especially the fall, because you even think about, Will Riley, 5-star. Yeah, well, he committed in May, right? So some of this has gotten shuffled around, but it's still fun and still certainly a key part of putting together rosters for the future.
I just want to be honest with people, though. This has kind of been as you said, Derek, ho-hum. Illinois lands 2 4-star guards, when in the past this would have been some of the biggest news of a recruiting cycle for an entire year. But part of it is because of the portal, right? And because of what they are doing overseas and adding a late guy like Will Riley, because those portal guys like Ben Humrickhouse in his first year and only year at Illinois is going to make a way bigger impact than both these guys we're talking about combined probably in their first year, right? Kylan Boswell, we know what he is. We know he's ready to play. Trey White, ready to play. Kerry Booth, right, is a former top 60, top 70 prospect. We still get Merez Johnson's a different level, right? What Notre Dame just did, getting a 5-star, those still are at a different level. But it just kind of has blunted the reaction. Even on our message board or on social media, this used to be the biggest news. And now it's just okay, yeah, we'll see what those guys are in a couple of years. I think the other part is, are these guys going to be around long enough for Illinois fans to see them develop? Because the portal giveth and it obviously taketh away.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it, is where you're almost afraid to get too excited because you've seen the names such as a Jaden Epps and a Sky Clark and an Andre Curbelo, and you can go on of Adam Miller, of in particular some of those really highly celebrated recruitments that just didn't last in terms of longevity with the program. So, but you also nailed it right on the head there with the portal. I mean, who was bigger, Marcus Damas or Quincy Guerrier, or getting Dre Gibbs-Lawhorn? Not to knock him, it's just that's just kind of the way it's been. Is the portal is instant impact, older guys Now, there is the chance, like for a Merez or a Will Riley, even if you would have got him, like say in the fall versus the spring, then we would have celebrated a 5-star because Illinois doesn't get those all that often. But certainly, you're talking instant impact. You're looking at the portal mostly. Although we'll talk about it, and I did some digging for my what it means story. Maybe we aren't celebrating the Brandon Lee one in particular, just based on context where he's ranked and whatnot, and what that means. But I think it also is a hat tip to Brad Underwood of raising the bar so high that top 100 is the baseline of what's expected. 4-star top 100 is what we expect. It's and he's dipped into the top 50 so many times now that it doesn't move the needle quite like it used to, as far as just the reactionary piece.
Yeah, it's like Michigan State in the heydays of, Tom Izzo. It's like, yeah, that's fine. But we want the top 50. We want the McDonald's All-American kind of guys. That is certainly another factor of it. But yeah, I think of a guy like Amani Hansberry, who I was really excited about. And I think he's going to do good things at West Virginia. But Brad Underwood has raised the bar, like a Merez Johnson, a Tomislav Ivisic, who's, basically a top 70 prospect. And then Kerry Booth, who's obviously probably gotten a better NBA, potential than an Amani Hansberry. It just tells you about how they keep raising the bar of this thing, Derek. But also there's a difference now, prep recruiting, where prep recruiting is becoming a little bit more popular again because, one, the COVID year is gone, but two, there's 15 scholarships available moving forward. And that gives you a little bit more room to take a guy that you like that might need a little bit more development.
For sure. Yeah. And you got to have prospects that will ultimately buy into that. And we'll still have to wait and see if that changes anything, or if people, I think always you'll have prospects that get impatient or just want to see a bigger path forward. And ultimately you take them maybe as a development guy and they don't wait it out. So that is something they're trying to evaluate, is who would be on board with taking some of those towards the bottom of the roster spots, just in terms of maybe instant impact. And maybe in a year, some guys maybe just need that physical development then to be ready to click into place. And that's where, as we'll get into specifically, like Keaton Wagler is a guy that you're selling the Adam Fletcher routine and all that he can do for you, and the winning part of it too. So people want to be part of successful programs. Illinois can maybe sell guys on less playing time than others, other options that they have out there for sure. But yeah, and I think too, it's just another thing is maybe we don't want to lose sight of guys that have played out longer strings, of time at Illinois. And I know it's becoming less and less common, but Trent Frazier, Coleman Hawkins, those type of guys. Will we see? How many of those will we see? We've talked about that a lot through recent years, but some of those who do take the time and the patience and buy in, ultimately they can pay off big. So I still think the prep recruiting is important. Obviously, so does Brad. And 4-star guys are certainly ones that usually give you a high chance to be, at the very least, solid rotational players, if not better than that.
Yeah, because you don't want to have to replace 10 guys every year. And when you're recruiting at the level they are, you're probably going to have to replace a lot. And then certain guys aren't happy with playing time. You do need some guys that might be bought into a little bit of development here. So let's dive into some of these guys, Derek. Keaton Wagler, out of a 4-star prospect, plays in Kansas. Really good shooter, really long. Why did Illinois prioritize him? A guy that was a late riser in the process here.
I think when you look at two things that Brad loves, positional size and also perimeter shooting, those are things that he definitely immediately jumps off the page of what he brings to the table. 6'6", can handle the ball as a combo guard. I look at him as that. I know up to this point he's played a lot of point, but I think he will be more of a combo, probably more off ball than on ball, but does have some ability to make some plays off the dribble. But you look at his shooting statistics last year as a junior, 50% from three, was on, and to add in another big bullet point there is winning. Winning pedigree is something that Brad really likes, and he was on a 25-0 state championship winning team as a junior there in Shawnee, Kansas. So you mesh all that together, but certainly there's upside when you look at 6'6", ability to shoot like that. Not a bad athlete at all. A very decent athlete, a guy that can make some plays going to the rim. Just really needs to get stronger and tap into that body. So another thing there of why he he has been a late bloomer, not super highly ranked until, and even then, even now he's not, but he did have a big bump in the rankings up to 150. Now 4 stars, just didn't play on a shoe brand circuit for AAU. And I think that presents a really interesting dynamic as we'll go into comparing maybe him versus Brandon Lee and things we know about Brandon versus things we maybe don't know about Keaton. He'll have an adjustment with the competition level for sure. And admittedly, I haven't seen him live. I've never seen him in person. I've seen his stuff online, and I like him. I like what I've seen, and it feels like one too that as I dug in and thought about some of the programs that were in competition with him, especially at the mid-major level, we had some really good mid-majors battling it out for him with Colorado State, Drake, Murray State, programs that are routinely in the NCAA tournament wanted him, and then Minnesota was selling him the Cam Christie little path to try to come in and be an instant impact freshman. And he obviously was a really good shooter, that being Cam. And then obviously Keaton is of that mold as well. And Illinois was able to outlast a big push from Minnesota and get him on board. So I like the ad. I think it is a little bit of a developmental type of addition, especially maybe a year of physical development. And then he might be ready for competition for a rotational ad. But I think it's one that's a good eval. And Tyler Underwood was on this pretty heavy.
Yeah, as we look at the backcourt, I would imagine we all think Kasparas Yakashon is probably only a 1-year guy. Will Riley, probably only a 1-year guy. At best, those guys are 2-year guys. Kylan Boswell will be gone after 26. Trey White will be gone after 26. We'll see if Dre Gibbs-Allhorn is still part of this. So it's a guy that if he's good at
too.
Yeah, Ty Rodgers gone after 26. So obviously they will hit the portal. There will be other people that will emerge, but there could be a role as a freshman if he can shoot the heck out of the ball. And in 27, there could be a big role because guys that could still be here, it's Jake Davis, Dre Gibbs-Allhorn, right? We don't know what else. There's a lot of time between then, but there could be a big role there as an underclassman.
For sure. In terms of known commodities, there's not a lot. For the time that he would be a sophomore, a lot of those pieces would have cycled out. Yes, the portal is going to be huge always for Brad to go back in and restock the pond. But certainly I think the vision for him is that, and they're high enough on him, they believe that he's going to be someone that is a factor. They feel like they found something that other people didn't see, and that maybe by the time that his body is ready in particular, that he'll be someone that is playing legit minutes in the Big Ten. So he'll have to earn that. He'll have to go through that progression. But I think that's part of the sell. Is not only we'll get you right as far as your body and your development, but there isn't just a ton of, like, we didn't just take a huge freshman class and is going to be there for 4 years. It's in front of you. Like, obviously that's not really the reality of college basketball anymore anyway, but you're not roadblocked as it stands right now. You'll be in, if we bring in newcomers, they'll be new just like you to try to then position yourself for some minutes.
All right, let's get to Brandon Lee, top 4-star prospect, top 100 prospect. Obviously, this kid can score. I mean, he scored at most levels. Orlando Antigua has led the charge here. Jarek, why did he become a priority for the Illini?
Yeah, you said it right there. Being able to score at a high level, especially when he's on. When he's on, he's done some really impressive things. I look back his high school season at the Patrick School, which is where Georgie played in New Jersey. They went up against a name you might know in Dylan Harper, who's a projected NBA lottery pick, and the Patrick School beat his team, and Brandon Lee led the way with 34 points. So he's got an ability to fill it up when he's on. He's had some nights in the EYBL this past spring and summer. I mean, he put up 23 a game in the regular season in the EYBL. He's a top 5 scorer in the league. I've sung the praises of EYBL for a long time. I just think the talent level is really high. You can say what you want about AAU basketball and play style and whatnot, but the talent level is definitely there. And to be in that upper echelon of scoring is important. Now, when you dig into the shooting numbers, the efficiency was lacking on the whole. And as somebody that contrary to Wagler, I've seen Brandon Lee a number of times. It was one of those, if you're kind of cherry picking or parachuting in, it would depend and trying to form an opinion on him. It would depend on when you saw him. Like, you could see him shoot it well and have a good game. Like, this guy's really good. And he's also had outputs. To give you kind of an example, he was playing in Atlanta back in May, and he hit 6 threes in a game, the final game there in Atlanta, and put up really good numbers. The game before that, he was 1 for 15 from the field. So like there are drastic differences in who he's been. The inconsistency is there. Need to take better shots on a routine basis. Need to be more efficient overall. But I think for a lot of freshmen, I mean, we could honestly spend a lot of time on this edition because there is a lot there in terms of sample size that we can look at. For a lot of freshmen, you're making that adjustment where you're not the best player on your team anymore. You're coming in and you're trying to establish yourself as a role player. And maybe it's a situation for Brandon that taking less shots, maybe deferring more on offense, understanding what's a good shot for him now in a new role could make his shooting numbers go up. And maybe it is going to be a situation where you don't worry as much. But admittedly, for me, I've kind of almost had like a tug of war with myself going back and forth with, all right, this number says this. Well, this number says that. I mean, he's a top 100 get, and that should not be taken for granted. And he's done some good things against good competition, but certainly the efficiency has to get better. And he's a guy that's taken a ton of shots, and just that will change as he goes to the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of that's fair because he's a guy that has shown that he can get buckets at the highest level, but the efficiency is not good enough. And how does that translate when you're not getting as many shots, like to be efficient? So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of emerges here. I like that he can get to the free throw line, Derek, and makes free throws at a high clip. He's got some size to him. It seems like a versatile guard here that I don't know what's his defense like, Derek, because he looks like a guy just profile wise that could be a tough defender. And you know, Orlando Antigua, on his background, this kid's from Puerto Rico. Obviously, you know, some of the guards from the Caribbean we think highly of because of what Andres Feliz and Andre Capello even bring in defensively. Those guys got after it. So I don't know if he's kind of got that in him too.
I think they expect with his frame and that he is a tough-minded player that he will be at least have a really good chance to be a solid defender at best, maybe even better than that. He's not like a great overall, like rangy, explosive athlete. That's one thing I would say. So he'll have to make up for that. But certainly physical at 6'4". That's one of the reasons that he shot a ton of free throws in the EYBL, 81% from the line. So that obviously will play. Defensively, I think up to this point, it hasn't been, from what I've seen, a huge part of his role. I mean, he's been the highest usage player on offense, and we've even seen that at like the level of Illinois, where sometimes those guys are just asserting all of their energy into that side of the ball. So I didn't notice him as like a terrible defender. I just didn't really probably see enough to where he's kind of really locking in and exerting his focus there. So, but in talking to people around the program, they think he can be a decent to good defender. He is tough. He's a guy that obviously has made shots, and that's another thing too. While you can say that he has been an inconsistent shot maker, I think that sometimes, and admittedly for me watching him, the best version of him in my mind was when he was finding a good balance between taking open shots and going to the rim. Sometimes he settled for jumpers too much, and that's where you had some nights where he just didn't have the shot going. But when he's going to the basket and getting fouled, obviously you see a lot more of his outings. But yeah, I think they hope that as a role piece, he'll have more buy-in there, and it will just change on what is expected out of him.
The other thing you can hit on, Derek, good bloodlines here, right? Like this kid with a father that played at a high level.
Pretty good. Yeah. Butch Lee was a Naismith Player of the Year in Marquette, an All-American, a guy that played in a Final Four. Then he was a first-round draft pick by the Atlanta Hawks, number 10 overall, I believe, in the 1978 draft. He was the first Puerto Rican to play in the NBA, so certainly highly thought of down there, and was coaching back in that pro league down in Puerto Rico when a name you might recognize, Orlando Antigua, was playing. So Orlando has known this family for a long, long time, and that obviously has created an end. So Butch Lee is a big deal, especially back in Puerto Rico. And then his son that's older than Brandon, Matthew Lee, was a starter on the St. Peter's team that beat Kentucky, beat Purdue, went to the Elite Eight. So it doesn't hurt, and it certainly can help in terms of those bloodlines being good, and also just kind of knowing what that path is like. Knowing, not to say that he's going to expect like, well, I'll transform into an All-American like my dad, but guys that have been through that process and sometimes know what it's like to go to college and produce and sometimes earn a role that you need to do.
Obviously the genetics have something to do with it. That's a good thing, right? But I agree, like that last point you made, Derek. Like I'm seeing it with Terrence Brooks right now. We saw it with Coleman Hawkins at times. Guys whose parents have been through this kind of thing know the process. Like they know, like you're going to face adversity at some point, and it's not everybody else's fault. You have to go through it. You have to learn from it. And I think having that is a kind of support system is always a positive compared to, someone like me who never went through it. Right. And like thinks if my kid's great, like it's all like everything should be coming to them. No, you got to kind of go through the adversity of it. And I think people who have been through it like that have a better understanding of some of that. So that's always a positive. What's next, Derek, in the class of 2025? Because this is a quick start here to the fall with 2 commitments. And it seems like, they've had a lot of targets that you've reported on. What's next? Who else are they focusing on?
I think you've reached a point now where you get 2 commits. You have a roster where everyone but Ben Rickhouse can come back potentially. Now, will that happen? Kaspar Shakachonis, Will Riley projected as first rounders. We know the portal is what it is, and there could be guys with so much competition on this roster. Someone's probably going to be unhappy, and whether they look for a different destination, that would be very reasonable. So, but all that in mind, and knowing that if there are openings on the roster, that the portal could be both good and potentially lose somebody, that you want flexibility there. I think that Illinois is tapping the brakes a little bit, at least on some of their targets who were on the radar. But Trey Maddox is a guy that they definitely are still pushing forward for. He's a 4-star wing out of Charlotte, very good athlete, going to visit the weekend of the Michigan game, which the way Illinois football has been playing, that should be a really good environment. Obviously, you have the rededication as well to factor in there. You're battling some ACC teams, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Vatech for him, primarily the teams that I've heard. But Illinois feels like they definitely need a plus athlete on the wing. That's one thing as they evaluate their roster that they don't really have going forward, especially longer term. So that's something that they've identified and have pushed forward for. Orlando Antigua continues to work on some of the bigger like home run swings that Illinois can still try to take. A guy like Sean Abev is a really talented playmaking wing they've gone and seen down in Florida. He's originally from Israel and has a lot of suitors. I mean, a lot of visits that he's taken. Arkansas and Illinois are 2 of the later arriving, trying to pop in there and get a visit. And then also Michael Brown is a 5-star point guard. He's the number 2 overall point guard in this class. And they've been trying to burst through that door here for a couple of months. And the situation with him is he's probably, at least based on what I've heard, he's probably going to wait till the spring to decide. So it's one of those guys that's going to evaluate the landscape, see what teams pop during the season, but also whose rosters are positioned to have immediate opportunity and also probably big NIL money. So if Kasparis is a no doubt, he's gone. We'll see what Kylan's season looks like. Illinois could maybe be a decently attractive option, but he's got Indiana, Alabama, Kentucky. He's got a lot of big time suitors for him, and we'll see if Illinois ultimately gets a visit, but they're working for one.
All right, Derek, let's talk about the big news that we've talked about in our previous podcast, but now it is completely official. Tim Anderson taking a leave from the program indefinitely. That's how they worded it. 2 months before the season, Illinois loses an assistant. This is the second assistant they've lost after last year's great year. Chester Frazier, of course, leaving to go to West Virginia. So now Quay Jones is promoted to fill Anderson's role temporarily. So you got Orlando Antigua, Jeff Alexander, Tyler Underwood, and Zach Hamer, all as assistants. Quay Jones steps up and is going to hit the recruiting trail, already has for them. Obviously, they worded it. He's taking a leave from the program indefinitely. He's gone. Tim Anderson is gone. Obviously made a huge impact. So let's start there, Derek. What was the impact of Tim Anderson on this program?
It was big. Yeah, no, they definitely got their money's worth for sure. And a guy that came in and gave you a great plug to Mean Streets. And that was something that paid big dividends. And even is going to on this current roster coming up this season when Tim's not on the sideline. You're going to see Merez Johnson, Illinois Mr. Basketball, one of the best recruits that the program has landed in the last 20, 25 years. So that was a big deal to get him on board early. Certainly Ty Rogers cycling through that program as well. But the biggest thing that you should start with, and I probably should have started with, is Terrence Shannon Jr. Being able to have the relationship with him so that when he hits the portal, now you needed both Tim's relationship and Michigan's admissions to come together in marriage there for it to happen, because I think he was going to go to Michigan if that didn't fall through. But ultimately, I mean, Tim was paramount, and being able to get him at Illinois. Terrence is going to have his jersey right next to Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Cockburn as the best players post 2005, and some of the all-time great players that we've seen in Illinois basketball ever, really. So that was huge.
We shouldn't overlook Tim's development of Terrence, right? Like he was a big part of that as well.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, not if he would have, at the end of his, what would that have been, junior season at Texas Tech, he wasn't probably going to be a draft pick. Obviously, he could have went and tried that, and then he develops into a first-round draft pick. And Tim was a guy he's working with on a daily basis. Tim having that background of player development, and we've talked about it before. I mean, Derrick Rose, Anthony Davis, other pros who have worked out with him, and there's a reason that he had a partnership with a sports agency, which is also another good connection that he had, because he was running their pre-draft workouts. He was running all their stuff to get him ready for the NBA Combine, to get him ready for individual workouts with teams. So there was a great background there. That was a huge asset that they utilized. And speaking of the agency, I mean, that was a plug for Matthew Meyer. That was a plug for Dane Danger. Like,
I was about to bring up Matthew Meyer. Matthew Meyer was a huge part of their success after Kofi Cockburn leaves this program, right? I know it was up and down. I know it was a roller coaster, but without him, they probably don't make the NCAA tournament that year.
Absolutely. And yeah, Brad had a previous relationship with him. He had recruited him a little bit in high school. So you had some of that. But when you have the relationship that Tim has with the agency, number one, you're getting the tip off of when guys are going to go to the portal, or guys are going to go in before they're actually in. So that, and you're positioned with that. And I think just having that in with the agency can help to try to steer certain things. And I'm not saying it was the only reason Illinois got Matthew Meyer, Terrence Shannon, or Dane Danger, but it certainly helped. And I know that the program definitely felt as such. So all of that makes it a tough loss. And you look forward to, I think we talked about it recently, even because Jackson Davis from Warren was on campus recently, like the 27 class in the state, and with that Mean Streets program is very promising. Jackson Davis, Davion Thompson, Howard Williams, and Tim. It has seemed, even one last thing I'll say is I was on the road, I think it was last summer, not this previous one, at a Mean Streets game, and there was a Big Ten assistant sitting next to Brad and Tim, and they were like, man, this isn't even fair that Tim's here right now, because I almost got to ask him if I can recruit these guys. Like, that's how in he is with Ty Streets and Chicago, but mainly the Mean Streets program. That if Tim wants somebody, usually out of Mean Streets, Illinois has gotten him during his short stint with the Illini. So that is no longer going to be there, obviously. Does it work against Illinois? We'll see. I don't know. We can talk about that, but big loss for sure.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the loss is blunted because of what Brad Underwood has shown, right? The ability to lose Orlando Antigua and Chin Coleman, and to find guys and go do well again, and to even get better than you were. The ability to go get Orlando Antigua blunts this a little bit, right? Because Orlando Antigua just had a hell of an offseason. Jeff Alexander kind of asserted himself as a recruiter, I think, this past summer, and had a hell of an offseason. Tim Anderson's fingerprints weren't on this as much. He's not on this roster as much, though Merez Johnson and Trey White certainly are. But Illinois has shown it can still go get talent, even when Tim wasn't as active this past summer. But he is a great recruiter and a great assistant and developer of talent, Derek. So why did this happen? Like what happened here, and why did this, come to a head? Because I mean, it was noticeable that Tim wasn't all that active. So it feels like this has been building for a while. Obviously Orlando Antigua got a huge contract, but Orlando Antigua has a huge resume as well. So we see all these other assistants get extensions, and obviously Tim Anderson did not. And that seems to be the crux of it all.
Yeah. And I think you framed it correctly there, because it's a loss of a guy that's done big things, but Brad has shown that he's been able to move past exits from his staff. Like when Orlando left, they still won at a pretty high level. And I don't think this is going to, I wouldn't imagine, deter Illinois from continuing to do what they've been able to do. Now we can get into the Chicago piece of it, which is part of this. But to answer your question, I think that it is connected, I think, with Orlando coming back and getting $900,000 as a base salary. And I think he's worth every penny. I would pay that guy that amount all day long, every day. And we don't have admittedly the full picture. I've heard things. I think a lot of it is probably from Tim's perspective. To tell you the truth, I don't know what Illinois came to the table and offered him as far as an extension goes, but that's where the core of it is based on what I've heard. I've talked to a lot of different people, and I think Tim really wanted an extension and significant raise coming off the Elite Eight, with obviously what he did with TJ and just in general, like he was going into the final year of his contract this upcoming season. Same with Jeff Alexander. Now I know that the News Gazette reported here recently that Jeff's in line to be bumped from essentially 370 up to 400. So you're talking about like a 9% raise. The base salary that's out there for Tim is 550. So I think a comparable range there for Tim would be from 550 to 600. Now you still have that huge discrepancy of 600 to 900 versus him in OA. So hesitancy to not just give him the same amount of money as OA. I mean, that might be
that's a huge
raise. And that would be probably the highest paid assistant staff in the country. They're already up there as one of the top in the Big Ten and one of the top nationally. So mixed into this also is the revenue sharing announcement, the fact that Josh Whitman now has to find $22 million to be able to pay at the highest threshold of revenue sharing starting next year to compete with the top of the market. So he said when we had the media roundtable that you got to find, that's not just sitting around in there. You got to make some tough decisions. You got to turn over every stone to figure it out. And again, like what was the middle meeting point of 550, what Tim was set to make, and 900, which is what OA was going to make, which wasn't going to be offered to him. What was the point where Tim would have said yes? And so that's, to answer your question, I think it was a negotiation that maybe didn't happen or wasn't going the way that Tim wanted. And I think that is the core of ultimately what is the departure of Tim Anderson.
And I get it from the outside. It's like, pay whatever. It's not our money. There is a budget, and this budget is getting really crunched. Now, from Tim's perspective, didn't matter with Orlando, right? Didn't matter there. So I can get where, there's some friction here. But there is the reality that you just don't have an unlimited budget. And of course, basketball and football pay the bills for everything. So you're going to invest more in those, but all these other coaches or all these people that might not get raises or some of these jobs that might go unfulfilled, that would be a pretty significant raise to go, 300, 400. Again, don't know exactly what the number would be, but that's a significant amount of money. So listen, he made a huge impact. I'm wondering what is next for Tim Anderson. Some people have speculated about Memphis, and I don't know, like he really loves Chicago. And I wonder, Derek, if he just goes back to training, to being involved in his community, because I know, being involved in his community in Chicago is very, very important to him. So I'm just intrigued to see what is next for him. If he goes back to, working for these agencies and training some of the best people in the world and being a big part of his community, or if he gets back into this somewhere else, and what will he be paid there? I don't know if it'll be $700,000 or anything like that, like Illinois is giving. So it'll be interesting. But now Illinois does have to figure out, all right, who's going to be our guy in Chicago, because prep recruiting still does matter. Having those relationships, I think, still does matter, even if it is lessened a little bit, especially when you got a class of 2027 that looks as special as it is. So what do you think is next for Brad Underwood? We will ask him. You guys will ask him next week at Big Ten Media Days, but I'm interested to see what he has to say about this.
I am as well, certainly. What I've been told and the expectation is that for this season, Quay Jones will act in that role as one of the 5 assistants who can go out on the road and recruit. Long term, it's a short term, and they even phrase it as such in the release, that in a temporary role, he'll be elevated to an assistant coach. Big picture, they'll have to or have the opportunity to go out there. And there is a lot of money. I mean, 550, if they want to offer that to somebody else, that's pretty attractive. I think
especially this program, what they're doing, the talent they're getting, the money they have there, like they are going to get great candidates. So that's another reason I'm just like, I'm not as concerned about losing even a talented guy like Tim, who was a huge part of this program, but it's just, you're going to have people lining out the door to get this job.
I would think so. Yeah, I think that Brad is going to command plenty of good candidates. It is going to be, and we talked about it on the last pod that we discussed this potentially happening, was when Tim was hired or prior to it, Brad was wrestling with, do I need a Chicago guy? Do I have to have one? I said it on the last one, like Chicago sells itself a lot more now than it did. I mean, Ayo Dosunmu doing what he's doing with the Bulls, Terrence about to play in the NBA as a first-round pick. Like those guys should be selling Chicago on a daily basis when you're not even up there. Now you got to have the relationships. That stuff still really matters. You have NIL too, which is something that maybe is on the other side of, well, maybe we don't need the end. We're winning at a high level. We have the NBA draft picks and we have NIL, like, or what will turn into revenue sharing. Like that all should be a good enough sell to the best players in your state. Now I do question, because let's not kid ourselves, like Chicago, there are relationships, there are egos. We have seen when some bridges aren't maybe completely burned, but there are roadblocks that can hurt you in trying to get some talent. So is Mean Streets rubbed the wrong way that Tim didn't get rewarded the way that he thought he should, or that it didn't progress out? We don't know that yet. I don't think it's going to be like you'll never get a player from Mean Streets ever again. Kind of, you know, the old threat that Mac Irvin said: you take Taylor Horton Tucker, you never get another Mac Irvin again. But yeah, I think in general the program's in a really healthy spot, winning a lot, NIL, and expect that to still be the case. And you got a lot of money to dole out. Imagine that it stays in the same realm of 500, 550 or whatnot, that you could get somebody else at that number.
Yeah, the other thing I want to mention to people is that it's kind of comes at a more advantageous time because Tyler Underwood and Zach Hamer have been assistants who've been on the road recruiting, right? Now that you have 5 assistants and you're allowed all of those guys to go out on the road, not all at the same time, but those guys have been part of this. And I know there's always the conversation of nepotism with Tyler Underwood. He is deserving of his spot. He's really been an asset. You've used that word, Derek. I think it's perfect. Tyler Underwood has been an asset for Illinois. He's basically been their offensive coordinator. Zach Hamer has been their defensive coordinator. These guys are a huge part of game planning. They're younger assistants. They're really tied into what is working at the NBA level. That I think has been really good for Brad to have those guys kind of in their ear about that. And Brad, you know, listening to those guys has been huge. But, you know, Jeff's a good recruiter. Orlando's a good recruiter. These guys, Tyler especially, has shown that he's a good recruiter. So at least it's one of 5 spots now and not one of 3. And Quay's obviously a young guy that Brad thinks the world of, and I think he'll do a pretty good job temporarily. So I do think they'll go and they probably had a limited pool right now that they could go get. They could go steal a guy if they really wanted to, but it's tough to work them in, you know, during this time when you're really gearing up for the season. So it does make some sense to wait till the end of the season and have a huge pool and see what you really want to add.
Yeah, and admittedly, I don't know this, but it's been something that's been speculated on. Like, does the leave of absence keep the money flowing or some money flowing to Tim? Would that be part of the equation?
Nice. They played nice with this, right? I mean, the statements they released, Tim was talking about.
Why you want to.
Correct, right? Like this has all been handled pretty professionally, where a lot hasn't leaked out of whatever drama this is, and they both said nice things about each other on the way out. So it does feel like they want to keep that relationship for the money and for, hey, we're doing well to you on the way out too. So don't burn us, you know, in Chicago or whatever it is in your circles. We're still taking care of you. So I don't know all the details of that, but I think you read this right there.
Yeah, it just seems like that could be something at play, as well as in addition to the idea that it is on a short window and we're up against it in terms of the timeline. And I think they're prepared. Like you said, that's a good point. And I've heard the same thing. Like Tyler's already very actively recruiting this 25 class. He's been on more guys than Tim has here recently. Like you said, this has been brewing here for a little while, and he just hasn't been as active recently until, leading up to this announcement. So Tyler's been the lead. He was on Keaton Wagler. He is on Trey Maddox. Zach Hamer's been on the road some too. So who takes the reins now in Chicago on some of these guys? Like, who's the lead on Jackson Davis? Who's the lead on Davion Thompson? That's going to be really interesting to see that formulate. I do think that there will be it won't be maybe just one guy. It'll be a group effort that has to be able to attack that and be able to satisfy some things and smooth some things over if they need to be smooth. But yeah, I think on the Tyler standpoint, I mean, you're getting him at a bargain, in my opinion. Somebody that I get why all the narrative is there. I mean, he's 28 years old, I think. No experience coaching wise outside of Illinois, but what he's done, like what the give back has, or what the get back has been from what you've offered him or allowed him to climb up the ranks has been really good. I don't think it's a situation where he's so narrow focused. All he's known is his dad's program, so he doesn't have outside ideas or anything fresh to bring to the table. Where we talked about when Steven Gentry got brought in from Gonzaga, like he kind of presented a new look at ball screen offense with what they did at Gonzaga, some transition stuff that tweaked and got Brad's ear to change out of spread into ball screen. And it helped a lot with Kofi and Io. Like Tyler and Zach are very geared towards or very aware of what's going on in the NBA, and matchup hunting is something that's totally different versus what they've done in terms of booty ball and some of their spread concepts and whatnot. So, I mean, they just had the number 3 offense in the country. Yes, you had to have really good players to do that, but they did. I don't think anybody would argue against them putting Terrence and Marcus and those guys in really good positions to be successful, and Tyler played a big part in that.
Absolutely. Derek, practice starts, right? Coming up this weekend or this week, and here we go. As you said, Ole Miss exhibition is just less than a month away here, and then the season starts in about 6 weeks. So we'll have to do another podcast breaking this all down, but here we go. Basketball is starting. That's another reason it's hard to go get somebody because, boy, practice is starting right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. I know that teams have been able to. This week was the first available window to start your official practice for the in season, the lead up to this obviously new year. But Illinois will wait until Monday. The men's side, I think the women's are already underway, but the men's side Monday will be their first practice, and then obviously Thursday will be the Big Ten Media Day, and man, we're off and rolling off of that. So I enjoyed my Big Ten schedule breakdown, which allowed me to refresh or learn more about especially some of these new teams that are in the mix. So I enjoyed that deep dive and writing that thing out, because now I feel like I'm smarter on the Big Ten than I was about a week ago.
Filling out our preseason prediction for the Athletic this year was incredibly hard. It has gotten harder and harder every year, it feels like. But with 18 teams, with all the portal movement, and without a lot of guys coming back to the league this year, this was incredibly hard. I could see 1 through 9 all being shaken up and spit out, and then like 7 through 15 being shaken up. Like, I feel best about the bottom teams. That's about as good as I got there, Derek.
I don't blame you. Yeah, it's something that I admittedly got to continue to take some stances on, because who wants to be like, oh, they're all the same type of thing. I did write that I think Indiana is going to win the league, which I know you've pushed back on that some, which I understand. I understand why.
It's not about the talent. You are right. They're the most probably talented roster. It's not about the talent, which means it's about the coaching. I still just don't trust it.
Right. But certainly, I mean, like, UCLA's got a talented roster, and they're trying to improve off of a really disappointing year last year, but they went out in the portal and did some things in addition to bringing a couple of those guys back. Oregon's got talent. I mean, they have Jackson Shellstad, that's going to be one of the best point guards in the league, in addition to 2 guys who are now sophomores, and Mookie Cook and KJ Evans, who were McDonald's All-Americans 2 years ago. Ohio State added a couple of former McDonald's All-Americans in the portal, Sean Stewart and another one as well. So there's a lot there on the plate to try to figure out and make choices. But we'll find out here soon enough on what that is looking like.
That's why I found myself leaning towards coaches. I really did. Like, I was like, I think I'm going to have Purdue and Illinois a little bit higher than other people. I think I'm going to have Iowa a little higher, that Northwestern, Nebraska. Like, I went with the guys, the coaches that I know, and that seem to get the most out of their talent, have good plans. While like the assemblage of talent is really important. It's why I have Indiana very high. It's why I have UCLA and Oregon, and obviously UCLA and Oregon's coaches have done some good things. But I kind of lean towards that because I trust that they're going to run something that makes sense for their players. I just don't have that about Indiana, so that's why.
Well, you don't have that obvious of Jawan anymore. We'll see what Dusty May does at Ann Arbor.
I had Michigan pretty high. I had Michigan pretty high. I love me some Vlad Golden. That was another thing that was hard. Preseason, all Big Ten, like we have 10 guys. Try to figure out 10 guys. Like, it's impossible.
Crazy. I mean, Rutgers deserves to be decently high as well, although I'm interested to see what that supporting class looks like outside of Bailey and Harper. I wrote this too. Like, I wasn't surprised, but I tried to make sure I wasn't missing anything. When those two teams meet in February, there's going to be 4 potential first-round picks on that court. And I wrote this, like, is there any other time in the last 15 years or so, outside of the 05 title game, that 4 first-round picks have been on the same court in an Illinois game? And I don't think there has been.
Man. I'm trying to think of like the most talented team they have played that might have 4, because Illinois has not. I mean, outside of Terrence, Terrence has been the one.
There was a Michigan State team that had Jaren Jackson and Miles Bridges.
That's one of the most
last
talented.
year's UConn team they played. You actually had Stephon Castle clinging against Terrence. That's 3.
I mean, some of those Ohio State teams that Thad might have had were ridiculous.
Yep.
Conley, Odin. Some of those other guys were really good. Deshaun
Indiana
Foster
with Cody Zeller and Oladipo one year.
Yeah,
but
no, it's been a long time. That's crazy. Like, that tells you the Big Ten money is getting somewhere too, right? Like,
it is.
The Big Ten SEC money is a little bit different for all these schools,
for sure. And then Duke's going to roll out probably 4 on their own here coming up at the Garden. So that'll be a fun month of February. It'll all be great.
Put together my travel schedule here. And Derek, you got some fun places to go. We're all going to head out to Duke and for New York and see Duke. And you're going to see Rutgers too. Like that's going to be a prime time. Like, that's a huge matchup of so much talent on the court. Like, it's going to be a fun year of matchups. You're going to see a ton of talent, and Illinois is going to have its fair share. So it's fun to start thinking about the possibilities of basketball season, but that overlap in November of football and basketball season, man, well, it's going to be a killer.
Yeah, we'll be praying for you for sure. We need a timeshare in NYC apparently, because we're going there every year.
Yeah, a little expensive to head there, but we can't miss Cooper Flag against Illinois. So we're excited that we'll be 3 deep at that one. All right, Derek Piper, you are the goods. Thanks for the insight on everything going on with Illini Hoops.
Fun as always, man.
All right, thanks to everybody for listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review wherever you get your podcast. If you're on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to us, hit the notifications bell as well. For Derek Piper, I'm Jeremy Werner. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time on the Illini Inquirer podcast.